Too many programs open. This is what happens when you don't have enough RAM. I have to shut down some programs. Okay. So fly down to Yorktown. There's layers over here in the lower left, so I'll turn off. I want to toggle stuff on and off. Roads are good. The primary database, we can turn all of that off, just get a raw map going, but I would like you to toggle the terrain on and off because it is two different forms of imagery once you get down to the street level that we can explore a little bit. So let's zoom in on the context. I think we're recording. Yep, okay. Let's get down here. One of the frustrating parts of Google Earth is that it has a slight tilt when you start to zoom in. That's just part of the interface. To reset the tilt, one of the most frustrating things, again, is just go to View, Reset, Tilt and Compass, and it will write the map to true north, which, as you know, Muncie is about, what, 1.5 degrees off. So, so I will toggle between the terrain layer and there's a 3D buildings layer. You'll see that the imagery changes significantly when we turn on and off the 3D buildings. See how that difference is? See the difference? They're about 2 years apart. Okay, right next to the mid station, you'll see the new Ivy Tech building. In the 3D image, that is not there yet. So the three-dimensional imagery is about 2.5 years behind. It looks like the latest imagery for Muncie has been updated recently, so you could see the streetscape project and you could see the Ivy Tech building going up there next to the mid station. So let's zoom in a little bit further. Nice to see that our imagery has been updated to something a little bit closer. Imagery date is always reflected in the lower bar here. You can see we're in September of 2019, so last year. Streetscape is completed, the hotel is completed, and Ivy Tech is under construction. So, so that imagery has been updated, but the 3D imagery is not as current. This 3D imagery is kind of special, though, because we can zoom in and start to look at buildings as if we were flying over them in a drone, or if we were an eagle or a hawk or a red-tailed hawk or something like that. You can start spinning them around and starting to see this level of imagery. It is not current, though, however. You can see, though, that the hotel in this case is still under construction. But Google updates this every 2 to 3 years. They will grab a number of different data sets from different aerial imagery and then start to stitch together a three-dimensional model of American cities. Not every American city is available. Only bigger cities or medium-sized cities or bigger are available for this type of imagery. So it is not, unfortunately, it's not super current, but it's updated every couple of years. This does become an image that we can use to start to create an aerial perspective of our development proposal. So, so it's kind of interesting for that. It's also really interesting just to geospatially explore the neighborhoods in this fashion. So we used this imagery for Module 2 when we did a three-dimensional bird's eye analytical diagram. So kind of get into position there. If you have a SketchUp model going, or have one in process, go ahead and open that. If not, no worries. We'll open up the new sample model that I just uploaded to Canvas. It has no trees in the title. So, in order to use this, make some imagery of this, we need to get it into a position that we're comfortable with. I don't need colors. We just need to pick an optimum viewing angle from where we think it is. So we can see that Anton used a previous image from previous years. Pick an optimum viewing angle for what might explain the development. It might be from the southwest in this case. It might be from the northwest. It might be from the southeast or the northeast. Depending on how people view the neighborhood, southwest, I don't know why it feels right, but I think having the park in the foreground starts to make a lot of sense for a lot of different reasons, but just in terms of reading this part of the city. But I want to use the orbit tool to get that to an optimum viewing angle. I might click on the shadows or not. Google Earth Imagery doesn't have it has shadows noticeable. You'll notice that there are cast shadows from the south onto the ground, but kind of subtle. They try to do most of their imagery in September or so. It's pre-fall colors, but so that all the trees are nice and green. But sometimes satellite imagery folks will want to photograph cities after leaf cover has fallen. So that used to be the case. They would wait until October, November, until all the leaves have fallen, and they would be able to see more of the street. But if we try to match up just visually, try to match the viewing angle. This takes a little practice, but the navigation tools are up here in the upper right of Google Earth. You can position the compass. You can pan the view a little bit with those arrows there. And we can move with these arrows here, make very micro movements. For dynamic panning, I think it's control click. You can move around with your mouse. I think it's control click. Wow, you can really get jiggy with it there. But try to visually match a viewing angle between the model and this view. It takes a little practice, but you can see with the two views here, you can get it pretty good to where the model is at a similar viewing angle to the context itself. It's not a precise thing, but it can work. Sketchup does have a photo match tool that is usable. It's a little bit more precise, but it's very complicated. It's not impossible, but it has a lot of steps involved. If you can just visually match these two things together, you can do a pretty good job of inserting this into the context. Now, if I were doing this on paper, this would just be trace paper going over back and forth. Yeah, probably pretty close. Probably, maybe. Okay. You can see though that the whole view disappears if we toggle those off. See a difference between the 3D layer and the 2D layer? Dramatically different image, isn't it? So we want that 3D layer on. Then we'll get ready to save that image. So I go to File, Save, Save Image. I'm going to toggle off all of these map options. Legend, Scale, Compass. I'll just turn all that stuff off. I'm going to bump this up to the maximum resolution. Maximum resolution. 4800 by 2981. It goes all the way to 11 because 11 is more than 10. Remember the 5th of November. 4800 by 2981. And that will download.
So when I hit save, I don't get any of those options. It doesn't even seem to react in any way. Like it clicks and then nothing happens.
Oh, really?
I'm like,
Are you in Google Earth Pro?
yes.
Okay.
I think something happened. I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay, that's saved. So that's saved to the desktop, 4,800 pixels wide. Now I'll go to SketchUp. I'm going to go to View. I'm going to turn off. I think I'll keep the shadows on. I think I will keep those on. You can just check and see how the shadows behave. And pick, I would say we need to be in September. So the source image was taken on September 25th, 2019. So I'm going to set the shadows to about around that time so that they're similar. Probably, I'm guessing around noon on either side of the 12 o'clock hour. Should work, but that would give us compatible shadows to what the Google Earth image is giving us. And then I'm going to get this ready for export. So we need to turn off axes, guides, we'll turn off all that stuff. I might turn I don't think the fog is going to work for us. I'm not going to use that. It's in the default style. So I'm going to get this ready for export. Export 2D graphic. This is going to be a portable network graphic. I'm going to click on Options. I'm going to toggle off the option for view size, and I'm going to tell it how wide I want this thing to be. Now, our context image is how wide? How many pixels wide? 4,800. So it should be larger than that, ideally. So I'm going to look at the realm of anywhere from 6,000 to 7,000 pixels, just so I get a nice, decent resolution image. For the line scale multiplier, that's going to determine the line weights of the model. I'm going to go 0.5 on that, and you'll see what that means here shortly. That setting there determines what kind of line weights you're looking at when it starts to export the model. And I will have anti-alias and transparent background clicked on. So that's ready for export. I'm going to go in the realm of 6,000 to 7,000 pixels. It's going to be a fairly large image, but it's going to give us a nice resolution that we can insert into the Google Earth image. And then I'll export that to the desktop. Yes? Yes?
I don't know what you said. When I click on export in 3D model, I don't have those options.
We are not exporting a 3D model. We are exporting a 2D graphic.
I don't have those options.
Okay?
It just goes straight to the save file.
So you don't have exporting options at all?
No.
2D graphic. Options.
I thought it was
Click off the view size, and then you can set.
I thought it was a window. What did you say for the ones behind?
So let's do it again. Export 2D graphic. I'm going to select portable network graphic, click on the options. I'm going to toggle off this view size thing, and I'm going to pick something probably 6,000 or 7,000 pixels. Okay, something in the realm of something nice and big. For this line scale multiplier, I'm going to do a 0.5 as opposed to a 1. And I'm going to have anti-aliasing and transparent background clicked on. Anti-aliasing is a smoothing mechanism for lines. So if you have curved lines in your model, the anti-aliasing is a smoothing mechanism for the lines. Transparent background will create a transparent background around the whole thing. Okay. I'll stop the recording there. Open this. I'm going to double click on the layer, make it layer 0. Then I'm going to duplicate that layer. So go ahead and duplicate that layer. Call one layer the background or the base layer. So I'm going to relabel that. And then call the other one. So we're going to just duplicate that image into 2 different layers. Call this second one the mask layer. Call one the base layer and one the mask layer. Okay, so open up this image. Double click on the layer to unlock it, then duplicate the layer. Now I'm going to make a new layer, call that the ghost. Let's call that the ghost. I'll grab a paint bucket and some white. I'm just going to paint the whole thing white. Oops. Going to move my base layer below everything else. That would make sense. So I've got now 3 layers going. I've got a base layer, a mask layer, and a ghost. I'm going to change the opacity. Once I paint this white, I'm going to change the opacity of the ghost down. I like 35, 40%. Then I will highlight these 2 layers, right mouse click, merge those 2 layers. Rename it mask layer with ghost. Our exported SketchUp model. Okay, so we need to figure out how much of this model do we want to actually see? How much of this model do we want to pop through? I'm going to guess, just based on what I've seen here, everything that is 3-dimensional would go from railroad track to Mulberry Street up to, it looks like Adams, and then over to Madison. So I'm going to cut out a hole in the mask layer so that this can pop through. Theoretically, conceptually, I need to cut a hole in the mask so that our 3-dimensional stuff can pop through. Okay. So back to Photoshop. I'm going to make the mask layer with ghost the active layer. I'm going to grab a polygonal or polygonal potato, Caribbean, and create a cutout of that equivalent area. So I'm going to start now and just go over the YMCA. Never mind. Don't do that, Lauren. Don't do that. It's tempting, but don't do it. Around the Baptist Church. Down Adams Street. Over to Madison. along the railroad track, as John Lee Hooker said. Down on the railroad track. Delete. Okay. All right. Deselect. All right, so what do we have? We have a mask with a cutout. We have a base layer underneath it. Okay. That right there is a diagrammatic image, isn't it? You can point to this with a citizen and say, this is our study area. So just the ghost itself, this is already an image that you could potentially use. Okay. All right. On its own layer now, I'm going to File, Place Embedded, our new exported SketchUp model. There it is. It's coming in on its own layer. So we just need to get that in place, and now we have some tools we can grab. I'm holding down the Shift key. I can grab some different tools. Transform, scale. So scale it up. Transform, rotate, put that about like there. Transform, skew, distort, perspective, warp. These are all fun, important, wonderful tools that help us skew this image so that we can get it just right. All underneath the edit function. These are all tools. Let me zoom out just a little bit. I've got to zoom out just a little bit. Zoom out. So I've got to get it covering the Baptist church and take it all the way to the railroad track. Yes?
I noticed when I imported my image from SketchUp
Yep.
that had the background still, so I went to go and just re-export it. I don't have the option to turn off that under rendering.
Okay.
All I have is anti-alias.
Okay. Make sure you're exporting it as a portable network graphic and not a JPEG. That will give you the option for the transparent background. That's a critical difference.
Okay.
Transform, perspective. I can actually push the perspective lines of this model like so. I think I'm really close. I'm almost there. Ret 5 going in. Stay on target, stay on target. Almost there. Red leader, this is gold leader. Red leader, this is gold leader. All right. I'm going to control click on that layer, rasterize the layer. It's coming in as a smart object. I have to right mouse click on that layer and rasterize it. So it's no longer a smart object. This is now just pixels. And I will tuck it into bed underneath the covers. Fit layer on screen, like so. I can make some additional adjustments here. Kind of move it around just a little bit more. Zoom out. Zoom out. Just a few more things I need to. It's now tucked in underneath the mask layer, so there's still, I can still do things to it. Stretch it like this. Get it just positioned so the Baptist church is exactly where it needs to be. And get this position so it's as close to the railroad tracks as possible. That looks pretty good. Okay. And I'll stop there. Next, I'm going to zoom in here and do a little bit of trim work. You'll notice there's some things missing here, so I need to take my mask and modify it just a little bit. So I'm going to turn down the opacity of the mask, and what that will do is reveal the portions of the model that the mask is covering up. Okay, see, it's covering up part of open door, it's covering up part of this parking garage. So I'm going to make the mask the active layer once again, just turn down the opacity of it, and I'm going to trim away all the portions of the mask that are covering up my model, including this parking garage, and it's part of open door. Till I'm satisfied with it. So this is just the part of the mask that is covering up part of the actual model. He's got a garage up here to the north, so I'm going to trim around that. And that's just another polygonal lasso. And I just enclose this. And with this is just modifying the mask now. Just delete that away. If we want to be more precise, then we can also grab the eraser tool and select a brush size and a brush type for that. Size and hardness. I'm always using the painting workspace, by the way. If you don't see all the tools that I have in my upper column, it's because I'm using the painting workspace. I tend to like the painting workspace for Illustrator and for Photoshop both. And then I can just carefully erase portions of the mask away. Just carefully erase that edge. Carefully. Remember, we're modifying the mask. So I'm just erasing around the portions of the mask that are covering up the model. I want this thing to blend into the context, so I'm being very careful about my hard edge. Okay. And we have to validate. We'll go to the PLAN605 module 4 and 5. We'll go to the PLAN605 folder and then go to the resources. And then we'll go to cutouts. And we'll go to tree cutouts. And I'm just going to grab a few trees, download those. You can preview them in this gallery view. Adjust the size up and down. These are all PNG cutouts, so they are previewable in Box. There's 4 pages of them. So just grab a variety of those. I'll just pick a few large ones. Download those. Back in Photoshop now, I'll make a tree layer. New layer, trees. It's going to be above the mask layer. I think being above the mask layer probably makes the most sense at this moment. Again, we can trim out the edges and things like that, but I'll go to the downloads folder now. My downloads, those come down as a folder like this. And I'm just going to open up all of these in Photoshop as individual files. Now, these are quite large. It can be very time-consuming to place these as is into the model because the trees that we're intending to depict in this particular illustration are quite small. And so you can scale them. You can scale them before you go into Photoshop, or you can scale them in Photoshop. Either way, because we have them as cutouts on a box folder, it just makes sense maybe to save a little bit of time just to get these smaller first. So right now these are 2304 by 2401 at 72 dpi. That's quite large. That would come in, this tree would cover up most of our image, which is 4,800 pixels wide. So if I just make these smaller right now, I'll take this down to 150 dpi, but I will shrink this thing down to something much smaller than before. It can probably only needs to be something much smaller in that realm. And I'll do that for each tree. This just saves a lot of time in Photoshop fiddling with things. So I'm taking it down to 150 dpi, 600, an image that's 600 pixels wide. And it just means a little bit of less time scaling the trees to our specific image here. Obviously you can place each one and that's fine, but for my own sanity, I just want to make these a little bit smaller before we take them in. I'll save those. You might want to change the file name just so you have a reference that these are now smaller files. These are now smallish trees. And now I can start placing them. So I'll place embedded. They're in my downloads folder. I'll just start placing these trees now. So see, this came in at a much more relative size as opposed to a very large tree, which would be gargantuan relative to the rest of the image. So I can start placing trees now. Photoshop trees as opposed to SketchUp trees, just to cover up edges and give some character to that. That comes in as a vector smart object. I can rasterize that layer and then I can duplicate it. So if by duplicating the layer, it'll make a duplicate of that exact tree. So I can start moving that around. I can scale it, rotate it a little bit, whatever I need to make that tree, that particular tree, fit into its context. I'll duplicate the layer again. Fastest way to make a duplicate is just to duplicate the layer and put this guy up here. Duplicate the layer, If the trees start to look too much alike, that can be a problem. But at this scale, not a huge problem. I can always, while I have the layer active, I can always go to transform, flip horizontal. I can flip the tree over. So flipping it horizontally makes the tree, basically flips it on its vertical axis, so it looks a little bit different than if it were standing next to a copy of itself. Okay. I'll place another tree of a different species. I downloaded 5 or 6 different species. Place that just for some variety. Or starting to make an argument for more trees along a certain edge. So this is a new thought here. I'll rasterize that layer. Duplicate the layer. Put a duplicate of itself right next to it. Maybe flip it just so it doesn't look exactly alike. And maybe start a line of trees here against the railroad track. Make it a little bit smaller. Duplicate the layer again. Maybe flip that over. Flip it horizontally so that 2 trees that of the same kind don't look exactly alike. You can trick your viewer a little bit. little trickiness. Duplicate that tree again. I will flip it horizontally. Transform. Flip horizontal. Experienced Photoshop users know the shortcuts for keyboard shortcuts for all this stuff. So if you see YouTube videos of other Photoshop users using the keyboard shortcuts, that's a much more efficient way of going about it. But for the sake of education, I use the pull-down menus. I just haven't gotten to the level where I'm memorizing all the keyboard shortcuts. But this is how you can make a line of trees that are quite similar look a little bit different, just by scaling them a little bit differently and by flipping them horizontally. So here's a line of trees starting to happen there in the foreground. And finally, the tree that's in the front, I'll move that to the top of the order, just so he or she is clearly in front of that line. And then I will merge all of them together. You can highlight those layers and then right mouse click and merge those layers together so that they are all part of a tree layer, a common tree layer.
If you wanted to come back later and, delete a tree or change it or something, is there a way, can you click that and divorce the layer to separate them all again?
In that case, I would not merge the layers. I would link the layers instead. You'll see here there is a option to link layers, and that what that does is starts to group them together, and that keeps each tree separated but organized, so that you could, yes, so they act together, right? In those cases, yes. Otherwise, once you merge the layers, it's just pixel on pixel. It's just another pixel at that point. Yeah, yeah. Good question. Okay. Got a very boring parking lot here between Howard Square and YMCA, so I'm going to place more trees of some kind. Not that kind. Maybe this kind. Howard Square Apartments there does have a series of trees, so I want to make sure that that's reflective of the property. Get that in there. Looks good. Duplicate the layer. And just go to town. Placing trees. This is the Bob Ross part of the exercise. Happy little trees. That tree needs a friend. Bob Ross Experience is a new exhibit at Minnetrista Center that opened this past week and was already featured in the New York Times. The fervor of, or the new interest in Bob Ross is because perhaps of the therapeutic nature of the program and how its folks have been drawn to it during quarantine, but also because NBC Peacock now has an entire Bob Ross channel, which is interesting.
He was from Muncie, correct?
Those were filmed just across the street, yeah, at WIPB. So yes, he moved to Muncie and recorded about 30 years of television right here. So yeah, he's not from here, but he moved here. Yeah, yeah.
Sound like at 10:30 every night.
Yes, yeah, yes,
Watch it every night.
yes, yeah, yes. It's very relaxing. Yeah, very relaxing. But now that there's an entire channel on Peacock, that surprised me. I didn't know that they were going to do that, but that Peacock was interested in that. But it has become quite the attraction.
Niche market.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. But yeah, used to be Saturday afternoons when I was growing up, and it was always a great time to take a nap. At least my father thought so. But there are things about Bob Ross that not just his soothing voice, but just in terms of things that he used to say about the paintings, and that he would say it's your world. You can determine what this painting becomes. I mean, those were very important, sort of, also kind of therapeutic things about having some sort of determination about the direction of the image, or about relationships between things, compositional relationships, and got translated into phrases like, well, this tree needs a friend. But it was in fact kind of a middle ground, foreground element, but in composition, but it became a relationship, and that folks, I think, are attracted to that sort of approach to things. And then Bob Ross was also quite the animal advocate, very much an animal rights advocate, and cared for a lot of animals when he was here in Muncie. So that's another aspect of his character that had a very nice impact, just the kindness that he showed to animals and all the different critters that would visit him on his property. He lived just west of campus. So. I guess one thing I didn't predict was how Bob Ross would become a meme, a very popular meme, and how meme culture just embraced that thing. And so there's probably 2 or 3 or 4 or 500 different versions of Bob Ross memes out there. So these trees are starting to get a little bit repetitive. Notice how I did place at least 2 or 3 different species just because if they're all the same tree and all the same species, that the image can get a little bit repetitive. So it's good to have a couple of species of tree there in your image. So if that happens, you know, you can always just keep duplicating. And then you can duplicate groups of trees. Once you get a group going, you can start duplicating groups. That's something. And that starts to fill out the image.